Alright, welcome everybody. My name is Julian, I'm the creator of Smartphone Filmmaking Pro, and I'm super excited to have you all. In this video, I'll share with you the top video settings that you can have on your iPhone. Just as a reference, I will be using the iPhone 14 Pro, so in case you're having an iPhone 11 or maybe even an older one, maybe some of the features that I will be showing in this video will not be available for you specifically. But in case you're searching for the best video settings, this video will still be very helpful. So without any further ado, let's hop into our settings. So first of all, I will show you a few settings that you can change or that I like to change in the settings app itself. And then later on, I will show you a few things and a few tips and tricks that you can change right directly in your camera app. So the first thing that we will do, we will scroll down until we can find camera. So here it is, just tap on that. And then as you can see, you have a bunch of different options. The first thing that we will check out is formats. And as you can see, you have two different options. You have high efficiency and most compatible. And high efficiency basically delivers the best quality possible with the smallest file sizes. And in case you're shooting in HDR, for example, or in case you're shooting with a cinematic mode on your iPhone 13 or 14, then automatically your iPhone switches into the high efficiency mode. And the most compatible mode will make an H.264 video, which, like the name applies, will be most compatible. But for me personally, I always leave this at high efficiency, and that is also what I would recommend that you do. I would say only in case you're struggling with that format, in case your editing software is not supporting it or something like this, then I would switch. But other than that, I would always leave it at high efficiency. Next up, we have a few photo settings, so we will not talk about these. And at the bottom, you have Apple ProRes. That is one of the best formats that you can use when you're shooting video. So in case you absolutely want to have the best quality possible, then this is what I would recommend that you should use. But just keep in mind, there is a downside with that high quality, and that is the file sizes. They are absolutely gigantic. So in case you are shooting in ProRes in 4K, 1 minute of footage will be 6 gigabytes of footage on your iPhone. So just bear that in mind. And for me personally, most of the times I'm not using ProRes, I'm just using the Dolby Vision HDR. So let's come to the next settings, and that is the record video. As you can see, you have a few different options. You have 720p all the way down to 4K at 60 frames per second. And to be honest, I would not change anything here directly in this settings app, because you can change that very easily right directly in your camera app. And I'll show you how that works in a minute. If you scroll down, you can also enable PAL formats. So depending on where you live, maybe in Europe, for example, you maybe want to enable these settings. And if you tap on that, as you can see, you now have a few more options. You can now also shoot in 25 frames per second. So yeah, that's an option. To be honest, most of the times I'm shooting 24 or 60 frames per second, so it doesn't really matter for me personally. Below that, you have enhanced stabilization, and there basically the iPhone crops in a little more to give you a little more of a steady video. And to be honest, I have that enabled because if I'm shooting handheld, which I'm doing very often, then I like to have this feature, and also you're not really losing any quality. Next up, you have action mode in lower light situations, and that basically means in case you are shooting in lower light situations, the action mode will not crop in that far so that it captures more light and so that you will get a brighter image. To be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of action mode, so I have turned that on, but I basically never use action mode. So yeah, that's not really important for me personally. Below that, we have HDR video. Definitely make sure to turn that on. That will massively improve the video quality and the looks of your video. Below that, we have auto frames per second. Just turn that off. I'm not a fan of that at all. There, the camera basically will guess for you which is the best frame rate. And yeah, to be honest, I do not like that. I like to dial in the settings how I like them. And yeah, that's just how I'm doing it. And then at the bottom here, we have something that is called lock camera, and that basically locks the camera so that it is not switching between the different lenses automatically whilst you are recording. As you maybe know, the iPhone 13 and 14, they have a macro lens. And if you are getting closer to the subject, it automatically switches to the ultra wide angle lens. And I'm not a big fan of this. I want to have full control myself, so I have turned on the settings so that it does not switch automatically. So these are my settings. Let's move on to record cinematic, and that basically is just for the cinematic mode, and my default settings are 4K at 24 frames per second. To be honest, I have to say with the iPhone 14, cinematic mode has gotten a huge bump over the 13 Pro, and with 4K at 24 frames per second, this is just very, very solid and it delivers amazing results. Next to that we have record stereo sound. I have just turned that on. Next up we have preserve settings. I have the camera mode turned on, the exposure adjustment and portrait zoom, and also at the bottom live photo. These are the settings that I have turned on. You can basically, decide for yourself which of these settings that you would like to turn on for yourself. But to be honest, these are not like very important and they will not change the overall outcome of your videos. So yeah, just turn on what you like, but these are the settings that I have there. Next to that we have use volume up for burst. That's just for photos. Scan QR codes also just for photos. Show detected text also just for photos. So I will not go more in depth into these settings. And then at the bottom we have something that is very important, and that is for the composition of your shots, because having the right frame rate and right resolution and all of that is important, but something that also gets very often overlooked by beginners is the composition. And something that will definitely help you with composing your shots in a nice way is the grid, so definitely turn that on. If you have turned that on, basically now over your camera app you have this 3x3 grid, and you can use that to frame your shots with the rule of thirds, for example, and there are also many other rules of composition that you can use to follow along. Below that we have mirror the front camera. I have turned that off, and below that we have view outside the frame. That's in case you're shooting with a regular camera. Below that we have mirror front camera. I have turned that off, and below that you have view outside the frame. In case you are shooting with the wide angle lens of your iPhone, you can also see an expansion of the frame with the ultra wide angle lens. I think it's a nice feature, it looks kind of cool, but again, it also doesn't really add anything to your image, so it's not that important. Below that we have the photographic style. I will not go more in depth into that. We have prioritize faster shooting, also not important for video. We have lens correction. It basically corrects the distortion of the ultra wide angle lens a little bit. That's nice. And we also have the macro control, and this basically, in case we're going into our camera app and into the photo mode, if I'm now moving closer, you can see at the bottom left that it switches into the macro mode, and there we can also turn that on or off. So these are the settings that I like to change within the settings app. And before I will show you a few settings and how you can change them within the stock camera app, I would like to very briefly talk about the sponsor for today's video, and that is Epidemic Sound. In case you're searching for some high quality music or sound effects without having to deal with any copyright claims and any of that stuff, I can highly recommend that you check out Epidemic Sound. Especially for beginners, it is often very tricky to find some nice music and sound effects for your videos without, like I said, having to deal with some copyright claims. Epidemic Sound is super easy to use, it's very intuitive. You can search for different genres, you can search for different moods, so depending on what you like, you will basically find the right music no matter what scenario you're looking for. Epidemic Sound does offer different subscription models, so if you are a content creator, you can choose between a personal and a commercial license, and the best of all, you can start a free trial today. So head over to the link in the description, start your free trial today, and again, a huge thanks to Epidemic Sound for sponsoring this video. Alright, so now let's check out the native camera app and let's see what settings we can change there. So this is basically what I can see. This is the native camera app, and as you can see at the top right, it says 30 and HD, and that is not what I want. So if you tap once on HD, it switches over to 4K, and if you tap on 30, which basically is the frames per second, and it depends on what I'm shooting. If I'm filming a person talking, for example, then I like to switch this to 24 frames per second, and if I'm shooting some B-roll, or I don't know, maybe I'm shooting a vacation video or some kids playing or whatever it might be, I like to switch this over to 60 frames per second, because then in the post-production I do have the option to slow the footage down, and this will deliver the best quality possible. So that's what I like to do, and that's basically the two different settings that I'm switching between. Next to that, on the iPhone 14 Pro at least, you have the action mode. You can turn that on and it tells me that more light is required. So yeah, basically you can use that. Like I said before, I'm not the biggest fan of this because it crops in and the quality is worse and it looks a bit, digital, so I'm not the biggest fan of this. Next to that, you have some of the settings, so you can turn on or off the flashlight, you can increase the overall exposure or you can turn it down. You can access the Pro mode, so ProRes on or off basically. You can also do this at the top, but it now tells me that it is not supported with 60 frames, so I have to turn it down to 24 frames per second. And then now I can shoot in ProRes, but like I said, it tells me maximum record time is 4 minutes, so I would have to delete some of the footage that I have on my phone. So like I said, I think the amount of storage that it takes compared to the quality, or compared to how much better the quality is, I just do not think that it is worth for most scenarios at least. So that's it, and then at the bottom you also can turn on again the action mode. That's basically it. At the top here you can also again dial in the overall exposure, and you can again turn on or off the flashlight. Something that is really cool and something that a lot of people do not know is that you can actually lock the focus and the exposure just with your native camera app. And the way on how this works is very simple. So I'm just framing my shot right now, and I long press on the screen until it says AE and AF locked. And now my focus and my exposure is not changing. And most of the times iPhone tend to overexpose just a little bit. So what I like to do is, again, I will lock my focus and my exposure, and then I can slide down just a little bit to bring down the overall exposure. And now I have a nice exposed image. I like the way it looks. And also the focus and the exposure is not changing whilst I'm recording. And this is just something that will massively improve the overall outcome of your videos. But that's basically it for the video mode. If we hop over to cinematic mode, at the top here you have this little F icon, and this basically is the aperture, and you can dial in just how much you want to blur out the background. So by default it's set to f2.8, and that's also the setting that I would recommend that you should use for most scenarios. But you can open up the aperture all the way to 2.0, or you can close it all the way to f.16. Cinematic mode does work best with a 1x lens, but I can recommend that you also try it out with a 3x lens. It just has a very nice effect, and it looks very not smartphone-ish, if I can say it like that. Because you're just not used to seeing such a compressed image with an iPhone or with a smartphone in general. So in case you want to have footage that is not looking as smartphone-y, then definitely use the cinematic mode and also play around with 3x lens. I got some really nice shots using that setup. Everything else is basically the same like in the native camera app, and then we hop over to the slow-mo mode. At the top here you can say it's recording in HD at 240 frames, and that's the most frames that the iPhone can capture. And in case you're shooting in a bit of a more lower light situation, then just switch that to 120 frames per second. Then you will not need as much light, but you will also get only half the frames. So yeah, depending on the environment, depending on the situation, just try out between those two. And also a quick tip here, in case you are shooting in super slow motion, then I would recommend that you shoot with a 1x lens, because this has the widest open aperture, the biggest sensor, and overall it creates the best image possible. So when you're shooting in super slow motion, stick with a 1x lens. And then at the left here we have time-lapse mode, and here you can basically create a time-lapse. I have used that a ton in the past. It's super easy to use in case you're having a tripod, or if you're using a gimbal, you can even create a hyperlapse. So yeah, just very cool things that you can do right directly with just your iPhone. In case you would like to learn more about filming with your smartphone, we do have a totally free webinar where I share the top 5 secrets that you need to know to create some cinematic videos with your smartphone. And in case you're searching for a gimbal for your smartphone, because by the time you are more getting into smartphone filmmaking, you will want to use a gimbal because it just massively, makes the footage more dynamic and overall improves the quality. I do have a comparison between the two best smartphone gimbals in my opinion, the Science Smooth 5 versus the DJI OM6. You can check that video out over there. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.